First of all, thanks for coming, everyone. Have any of you ever been to Springfield, Illinois? Okay, good. Did you go to the Lincoln sites?
Yeah, we used to live there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Springfield, Illinois is a very important town to me because I met my wife there. Okay, but I've got her in Gastonia now. I'm not letting her go back. But anyway, if you're not familiar with Springfield, Illinois, it's the land of Lincoln, and he has his home there. His law offices are there. They have the church pew he used to sit in. There's the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum, and of course the tomb. John asked me at the beginning. He said, "Well, how did you start doing this lecture?" I said, "Well, I used to work at the tomb. I volunteered at the tomb for 9 years." And so once I found out about this story, I used to stand right in front of the headstone and tell the story, and I was amazed at how intrigued people were with the story. And I was also amazed that most people have not heard of this story. How many of you have ever heard of the story of the theft? See, it's not unusual. And believe it or not, there's at least 4 or 5 books and a DVD on it. And I'm going to show you at the end of this, there's a children's book about the attempted theft, which blows my mind.
Wow.
And one of the persons in this story that we're going to talk about today actually wrote a book himself. He was the caretaker of Abraham Lincoln's tomb for a long time, and he actually wrote a book detailing everything that happened. So I'm going to go over the highlights or lowlights, depending on how you want to look at it, of this particular incident. I mean, can you imagine somebody trying to steal the body of Abraham Lincoln? And why in the world they want to do that? Well, I'm going to tell you why in just a moment. So let's get started. I want to tell you a little bit I'll show you something that you probably have not seen, and I can't verify if this is true or not. But does anybody ever, well, you can see at the bottom of the screen, it says Judy Garland Museum. That might give you a hint where you've seen this carriage. Wizard of Oz, very good, okay. It's also appeared in many other films. What's this got to do with Abraham Lincoln? I'm going to show you eventually. So, again, I can't verify. Most people believe this is true. I've had some people say, "Oh, it's not true," but I believe it to be true. It was given to Abraham Lincoln as a gift during the Civil War. There was a handwritten note on the frame, A. Lincoln, June 8, 1863. It was a scene of a horse of a different color in The Wizard of Oz this carriage was in. And this is the amazing thing about it. Used in over 200 films. Anytime they want to depict something in the Civil War area and they want to use it there, they want to use this carriage. So it's been used quite a bit. I just recently discovered this, so I like to bring that up. So if you've never been to Springfield, Illinois, I'm going to sound like their Chamber of Commerce for a few minutes. And this is Abraham Lincoln, the only home he ever owned. He lived there for 17 years. When he bought the home, it was one level. He added the top floor. And this is where he was this is where he was living when he found out he was going to be running for President of the United States. So there's a lot of history there. And there's a backyard that you can't see in the photos, and I didn't bother to show you the outside toilet that they had in the back, but they definitely had one there. But if you ever get a chance to go, it's a 15-minute tour, and it's amazing. Most of the things are recreated in the home, but they have a handrail going upstairs that Abraham Lincoln actually used when you go upstairs, so you can actually touch something that Abraham Lincoln touched. It thrills me anyway. This is the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum. I worked at the tomb for 9 years, and believe it or not, even though I live here in North Carolina in Gastonia, I volunteer at the museum. And when I go home once or twice a year, I'm living with in-laws, so there's my motivation. Okay? I can say, I've got 2 aunts here, so I hope they don't tell my wife what I just said. Anyway, no, I love my in-laws, but I hope that got me out of it. Anyway, I started at the tomb, and so I called over, when I was at the tomb, I called over to the museum when it opened a few years later and said, "I'd like to volunteer." They said, "Where do you live?" I said, "North Carolina." I said, "You can't work at the museum if you live in North Carolina." So I waited till the next year, called again. And I said, "Look, please call the tomb." I said, "I volunteer at the tomb." So they called over the tomb and said, "Who's this Burke guy keeps calling us?" They said, "You got to let him do it." So fortunately, once or twice a year, depending on how often we go to Springfield, I get to volunteer at the museum. So this year, On July 8th, I'll be standing at the front of the museum greeting visitors, and on July 9th, they're going to hear the same presentation that you're going to hear right now. So I've been able to have the honor of giving this presentation. This will be the third time there, so I'm really excited about that. So when Lincoln originally was buried and arrived in Springfield, you may or may not know about the 10-day long funeral train that Lincoln's body took on the way back. And it's really an interesting situation of how the embalming was really invented during the Civil War. And Lincoln's son that passed away in the White House, he was embalmed, and instead of burying him, they actually entombed him somewhere in the White House, and he would actually go down and pull out his body. I know that sounds creepy, but he pulled out his body and stared and said, I want to be able to look at him as long as I can. The same embalmer that did Lincoln's child also did Abraham Lincoln. So if you go to Springfield, Illinois, Oak Ridge Cemetery, this is the original place where they placed Lincoln's body. And you'll see how it relates to the current tomb. And by the way, just to show you how much I'm in love with Lincoln, I did create this jacket this morning. I had nothing to do, so I painted this. No, that's a lie. I had this made, but when I pass away, guess where I'm going to be buried? Oak Ridge Cemetery. Okay, so that'll tell you I'm a little bit fanatical about it. My dog's name is Lincoln. We have a Lincoln room in our home. Okay, so I'll stop there. I do have Lincoln socks on, Lincoln tie, and that's about all I can show you in public. Okay? But anyway, as you can see, all we have here, there was a pedestal inside, and inside this, and there's just a padlock there, and a little plaque that tells you that Lincoln was buried there for a certain time. Now, if you look above the hill, we're going to get to you see the obelisk of the tower, we'll just say, and that's where Lincoln is currently buried now. You can see in relation to where it was, but when they first buried him, it's interesting how they wanted to decide where to bury him. You know who they didn't ask where they wanted Lincoln buried? His wife. Didn't ask him. When she found out, they wanted to bury him where George Washington was going to be buried. Because George Washington had a place to be buried, and he decided no, he wanted to be at his home. So they decided they were going to put Lincoln there, and then they said, no, we want him in Springfield. They were actually going to bury him near a train station in Springfield for tourist reasons. They figured people would drive into Springfield, ride into Springfield, get off and look at the grave, and then leave. But when Mary found out about that, said, if you don't listen to what I say, I'll have him buried in Chicago. And so she pulled her weight there, and thank goodness she did. This is a beautiful cemetery. Now, this is still the back of the tomb. And if you were to walk, if you start out where he was originally placed in the sarcophagus and start going up the steps, you go to the back of the tomb, and that door, you see, I don't know why my red light's not working there, but my door, let me go back. I'm going backwards now, aren't I? That door, let me just point it out, right here, is where the robbery attempt's going to happen. So we'll talk about that obviously in just a few minutes. This is a close-up. We're going to get a little closer. You can see Lincoln across the back. Now, when they first had this, all it was you see the glass behind the bars there? Originally, there was no glass. So what would happen is people would come to the tomb, they'd go to the back of the tomb, and they would look through the door if the door may be open at that time, and then it was just padlocked at night. And Lincoln's was in a sarcophagus on a pedestal, just laying across the top there. So it's really somewhat easy access. Have any of you ever been to George Washington, Martha Washington's graves? Okay, so they're buried the same way. They're in a protected area, but they're above ground. So again, it's sort of interesting. Notice the pennies across the bottom there. People, to sort of honor Lincoln, they placed pennies across the bottom there. By the way, when I lived near Baltimore, I went to John Wilkes Booth's grave, you know, the assassinator. And, you know, they don't mark his grave. They're afraid people to this day will desecrate the grave. So they have a smaller tower. They have all of the names of the Booth family there, or most of the names. Even John Wilkes is on there, but they don't show you where he's buried. So I went to the caretaker and said, can you tell me where he's buried? I said, I won't tell anybody. He wouldn't tell me. Okay? And also a couple of the people who were in the conspiracy to assassinate Lincoln are buried there. Now, if you were to go visit the tomb, you park, if you're facing the tomb, from the front of the tomb. You'd park to the left side. This is where you would walk in. And it's hard for me to tell you, describe to you how large this place really is. But again, you can see the small ants walking around. Those are people. The tower is 117 feet tall. This is more walking out in the front of the tomb. And I'm going to show you some really good photos inside as well. This is during the fall season. Again, it's 117 feet tall. They have various different statues. I worked with a guy at a tomb who could tell you what the statues are made of, what they represent, and all that. I can't tell you all of that, but the names you see across the bottom there, these are states. Again, it's not working here, but there's names of the states that were in the United States at that time were listed there. Now, this is a bust of Lincoln that's out in front of the tomb. Notice his nose. Does anybody know why his nose is like that? Yeah. Supposedly, when soldiers went off to war, they would rub his nose for good luck. And when I first started working at the tomb, they said, we want you to try to get people to not rub the nose. I'm like, are you kidding? I'm not going to tell somebody they can't do this. They've given up on that. And by the way, the story I'm telling you about, they eventually allowed me to tell that, and they also would not let me mention Abraham Lincoln's girlfriend before he met Mary. There were certain things they just didn't want to talk about. So anyway, all that's changed. So when you go to the tomb, you've got to rub Lincoln's nose. And you just generally, my wife and I doing the same thing at the tomb several years ago. Again, it's all for good luck. But you can see the nose is approximately 50 feet from the front door of the tomb. Once you enter the tomb, there's a big, heavy door at the front. Does this statue look familiar? Mm-hmm. It's in Washington, D.C. So again, this is sort of a model of what they have in Washington, D.C. Now, when you enter the tomb, above is a golden dome. And then what you do is you walk around to the right. And it's basically the tomb is a circle, and you get to the very back is where Lincoln is buried. And I'll show you a picture of that as well. Again, a close-up photo. Even closer. And then if you look closely at his shoes, particularly the right shoe, people will reach across the bar that's there to protect Lincoln and rub his shoe. So I guess, nose and the shoe, that's something for good luck. Now, this is inside the tower. And why am I showing you this? Because I've been up in there. I did not climb up because I have fear of heights, but I did go in there just to see. And I actually I went there twice, climbed in the back where I could see where the children and Mary are buried. And that'll make more sense in just a moment. Couldn't see their burial spot, but you could see the cement that it covered them. By the way, if you look at the inside of that, there's a rope that hangs down too. I wouldn't trust those steps or the rope anyway. They've been there a long time. As you go around the tomb, there are various statues representing different times in Abraham Lincoln's life. And I'm not showing you all of these, but there's a Lincoln lawyer statue, and there's a plaque below each statue, and it describes the period of life that Lincoln was in. You may know that when Lincoln was an attorney that he rode horseback to various cities to provide law services. Again, a younger Lincoln. And again, look at the shoes. People try to rub every part of the statue. It's amazing. By the way, another funny thing, I have people, when I work at the museum now, they'll come up and say, I'm a descendant of Abraham Lincoln. Depending on how big they are, I don't argue with them. Okay, but the last close descendant of Lincoln died, I believe it's 1973. There's actually a plaque outside that tells that. But I had one person come to me honestly and said, I've got a copy of the Gettysburg Address. I said, well, there are plenty of copies. No, I got a real one. I said, where'd you get it? He said, I got it at a yard sale, $5. Okay. I said, go across to the museum and let them verify that for you, that it's worth what you think it is. And I don't know if he did or not. But again, a lot of people like to claim their relatives or descendants of Abraham Lincoln or close descendants anyway. So this is the headstone. Very simple headstone. It just says Abraham Lincoln, the year he was born, the year he passed away. If you want to know the details, this is something we would tell people to visit. I would be standing on the right side of the tomb. Lincoln is buried so that his head's on the left side of the tomb, no, the right side of the tomb, depending on how you look at it. His feet are at the Lincoln side of the headstone. He's buried 10 feet below. He's in a steel cage and got cement poured on top of him. And the reason for this is because of the story we're about to tell you. And his son had that done because his son's boss, who used to run a train station, on the train railway actually, someone tried to steal his body at one time, and that's what they did to protect him. So if people want to, try to get Lincoln's DNA, they're going to have to do a lot of work to get down to Lincoln. All of the flags, by the way, around the headstone represent states that Lincoln lived in. There's also a presidential flag that I believe Ronald Reagan donated to the tomb. There are photos. You can find photos online of various presidents visiting the tomb. And what I find really interesting about this is most of the time when people come back there, this is when they get real quiet because they realize they're standing right in front of where Abraham Lincoln's body is. And it's really a solemn moment. By the way, have you ever seen the movie Lincoln? Steven Spielberg did and all that. And who was the actor that played Lincoln? Daniel Day-Lewis. Okay, if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend seeing it. It's a good movie. I used to work, this shows you how much I love my in-laws. When we go to Springfield, I'd work one day at the tomb and one day at the museum. And so one day I worked at the tomb, and they said an actor came in. It wasn't Daniel Day-Lewis. I'm trying to remember the actor's name in just a moment. But he came in and someone recognized him and said, "Aren't you so-and-so?" And he goes, "Yeah." He said, "What are you doing here?" He says, "Well, I'm about to play Lincoln in a Steven Spielberg movie." I'm forgetting the guy's name. Hopefully I'll think of it before the end of this presentation. And so the next day I was at the Lincoln Museum and I was telling the museum about this actor showing up. They said, "Oh, he came over here too." So he was doing his research about Abraham Lincoln, but it ended up someone else. Daniel Day-Lewis ended up playing him, so it was a different actor. Who was the guy in the movie about the Holocaust that Spielberg did? Do you remember that actor? Anybody? Somebody Google it. Logan, Google it for me.
Yeah, got you.
Schindler's List is the name of the movie.
That was all I can do.
No, that's right. If you look at the lead actor in that, that's who was going to play Lincoln, but somehow got out of it. Now, straight behind the headstone, and inscribed on the wall up there, it says, "Now he belongs to the ages." This was said by the Secretary of War, Edward Stanton, as Lincoln passed. And there's even some discrepancy if he actually said, "Now he belongs to the ages," or whether he said, "Now he belongs to the angels." And somebody who listened to it, did you find it yet, Logan?
I think it's Liam Neeson.
Liam Neeson, that's who it was. Thank you. Some people think that Stan said ages, and the person, there was someone there writing down everything that was happening, may have misscripted it, but this is what's inscripted there.
They have that same in the Abraham Lincoln movie too.
Yes.
They did that.
Yeah. They also, in that Lincoln movie, they actually had they used the clock that Lincoln used to own, and they used different things from the museum. They borrowed things from the museum just to have some realistic things. So again, this is just another view of the Lincoln headstone. You're not allowed to go back there, but of course, I've been back there. But the dome, again, there's a gold dome again above the headstone there. And again, Lincoln's 10 feet below there. Now, directly across, if I'm looking at Lincoln's headstone from here, look behind me, this is where 3 of his 4 sons are buried, and also Mary Todd Lincoln. And they're in the wall directly across. And again, these pictures are somewhat hard to see, but again, a similar type thing. And look at the ages of the sons. If you don't know the Lincoln story already, they were very young when they passed away, all except for one. Now, the only one of Lincoln's sons that lived to really adulthood was Robert Todd Lincoln. There's an excellent biography that came out a few years ago. I highly recommend it. But at the tomb, one interesting thing, he's not buried here, by the way. When he passed away, it was always believed that he was going to be buried at the same place his family was. But his wife, whose name was also Mary, said he served in the Civil War, so I want him buried in Arlington Cemetery. So that's where he's buried. And his son, which I'll show you that headstone too, but I want to show you what happens here. Look closely at the year he was born. I'm going to show you a closer photo. When they first put it up, they put 1844. The correct year is 1843. So it looks like they took an eraser and tried to fix it. And it's like this to this day. I don't know why they don't spend the money to make it look better, but it's sort of interesting leaving it as it is. Robert Todd Lincoln, obviously his father was assassinated, but he was with another president who was shot, so he sort of around it. Now, I've been to Arlington National Cemetery, and this is Robert Todd Lincoln's headstone. And his son's buried there. Look at his son's name. How would you like to be left with that name? Abraham Lincoln II. That would be a lot to live up to. But again, his son didn't live very long. That particular son. Now, what you're seeing here is an enhanced photo, what we believe is the only photo ever taken of Lincoln in the casket. There was a photographer, the photo you see on the left was taken from an upper higher position, and the photographer who did it, listed there, Jeremiah Gurney, was not supposed to do that. When Edwin Stanton found out he had taken those, he got the negatives, they were a little different than negatives we used to know, and basically destroyed them, except for one. And he kept this one, he didn't tell him about it. And some student was going through a library in Illinois, going through a book of stuff, and found this photo. And so it's been enhanced so you can see Lincoln lying in the casket, but this is the only photo that we know that was taken of Lincoln while he was in the casket. So, why would somebody want to steal Abraham Lincoln's body? All had to do with counterfeiting. Private banks used to issue currency. Now try to imagine this. There was no United States currency. Private banks in different states all had different currencies. So imagine that mess. At one point, there were more than 10,000 types of currency. $1 bills, $2 bills, $3 bills, $13 bill? Why would you want a $13 bill? I don't know. Now, one way to look at this is great for counterfeiters because they can do just about anything, and people might think, well, this is just a bill from another state. But again, there were so many different types of bills out there. Lincoln created the first national currency in 1863. This is something you probably have not heard before. Lincoln also created the Secret Service. But the Secret Service was to protect counterfeiting, not to protect the president, unfortunately. So again, their duties changed after Lincoln was assassinated. So again, there was a big counterfeiting problem. So here are the people that are involved in our story. Ben Boyd was considered one of the major counterfeiters. Big Jim Canale was a counterfeiter as well, but he was more of an organization man, a person who owned a bar, and he had certainly was involved in counterfeiting. Boyd was the person who really did the artwork, so to speak. So it keep the story going. Now, there was another plot in 1876 to steal the body, so we believe the story I'm going to tell you today, they got the idea from this, because really nobody had done anything like this until that time. So Big Jim Canale was considered the idea man. So Terrence Mullen was a person who also was a counterfeiter, and he worked in the bar that Big Jim Canale owned. Then Jack Hughes was one of the other people involved in the crime that we're going to talk about today. If you can find better photos, let me know. I've looked all over. I can't find any better photos of these gentlemen, but you can see sort of what they look like, and you can decide whether they look like criminals or not. But again, these are just photos of the people that we're going to be talking about. Now, here's a gentleman I mentioned earlier, John Carroll Power. He was like one of the first custodians of the tomb. He loved Abraham Lincoln. He's one of the persons that wrote a book. He was there when this happened. He's part of the story, and he wrote a book about it. So You can't find the book, but you can buy reprints. And I've got that. I wrote I bought it off somebody one of the companies who would reprint the book. Patrick Tyrrell was a Secret Service agent who's going to help try to foil this plot that we're going to talk about in just a moment. So, here's what happened. Ben Boyd. Now, this is the art person in the counterfeiting ring, the one who's doing all the making the counterfeit bills. He was arrested by Tyrrell and put in jail for 10 years. And again, at this time, this was a major blow to the counterfeiters because the major person who could recreate the fake money was in jail. So, Big Jim Canale's counterfeiting covered the state of Illinois. Again, Boyd was his primary engraver. So Canale, again, as I mentioned earlier, owned the hub that I just talked about a little bit earlier. And we think he got the grave robbing idea from the earlier attempt that somebody was trying. I'm going to tell you how that happened. And basically what happened is it was planned for July 3rd, 1876. Look, if you can read at the bottom there. One of the guys that was going to be doing the grave robbing got really drunk and hired a prostitute. And while he was really in a drunken stupor, he told the prostitute what they were going to do tomorrow. And the prostitute said, well, I don't think I can let that happen. So she was friends with the chief of police. Shocker. So she told the chief of police, and basically the guy who told the prostitute woke up the next morning in a stupor and like, oh my gosh, what did I do? I just gave it away, so they called it off. So that plot was foiled by one of their own. I always think that's the funny part of the story. So, for what we're talking about today, Canale enlisted Mullen and Hughes, but they decided they needed a third person. Now, none of them had ever robbed a grave. This was not something people did. Now, people did rob graves, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, of why people did that. There was a gentleman also by the name of Louis Swagels, who was a former horse thief. He was in that bar and heard them talking about going and possibly robbing a grave. So he went up to them and said, look, I'm the boss body snatcher of Chicago, which he totally made that up, just to impress them. So he wanted to be a part of it. And then they added a fourth person, Billy Brown, who had an alias named William Neely, and he was going to help as well. And I'm going to give you their roles in this as we move the story along. So here was their plan. Back then, to take a train from Chicago to Springfield, you could drive in about 3 hours nowadays, maybe quicker. But the train ride was 9 hours. So they planned to take the 9-hour train ride. Now, pay close attention to the date that they were planning on stealing the body, because this is about the only smart thing this group of counterfeiters did. So, Swagels and Hughes go out, when they get to Springfield, they go out to the tomb, and they meet with John Carroll Powell, the custodian. And so they're asking all kinds of questions. Is anybody here at night? Is that Lincoln's body right there? And they see that there's only a padlock keeping them out of the tomb. So they're studying the structure, and John Carroll Powell's telling them things that's actually helping them. So here's what they were going to do. They're going to steal the body. They're going to take the body 220 miles and bury it in a sand dune. Now think about this. They weren't going to put it on a train. They're going to take it in a horse-drawn carriage. And to go 220 miles in a horse-drawn carriage, covering up a casket in the back, somebody's going to be a little bit suspicious about that. But I guess they weren't worried about that. But that was what their plan was going to be. And so they were going to try to bury it in sand dunes, and they hoped that the wind would blow and cover up all their tracks. Then they were going to ask either from the state of Illinois or the National Lincoln Monument Association, which is a group of people who decided, we need to have a better burial place for Abraham Lincoln. And so they were raising money to build the tomb that you just saw. They were going to ask for $200,000 and ask for their major counterfeiter to be released from jail. Now, you might be thinking, who's going to ask to be released from jail? Because if somebody asks, they're going to know that they're part of the plot. Well, they were going to have the counterfeiter, Ben Boyd, from jail negotiate this. Okay, that's what was believed to happen. So again, $200,000 and get him out of jail. Now, believe it or not, body snatching wasn't considered that much of a crime back then. What used to happen a lot of times, bodies were stolen, and they were sold to medical schools. And the belief behind that was cops may go by and see people out at the cemetery at night and they're digging up bodies. They would just sort of turn their head and say, well, they're going to sell them to a medical school, and that's all for science. It's going to help us learn more about us and keep us alive longer, so they pretty much let it go. So, remember I told you the date that you saw earlier, November 6th. Well, November 7th was a presidential election, might be the most controversial presidential election ever. I think it is. Do you remember the hanging chads back years ago? Jude, I know you're too young, but the hanging chad, that was bad, but this is much worse, and you're going to see why in just a second. So you had Rutherford B. Hayes and Samuel Tilden for U.S. President. Look at the voter turnout. Can you imagine that? 82% of the people voted in this election. It's unreal. I wish we could get that today. It took 4 months to count the votes. And there were all kinds of wheeling and dealing going on between the Democrats and Republicans trying to decide who was going to be president. So there's a lot more that goes into it. But what happened was, because the grave robbery attempt happened on near this election day, this stuff, the Lincoln grave robbery, was basically put in the back pages of the paper, which is basically the only way people found out about the news. So it didn't get much attention. So the only smart thing the counterfeiters did was decide to do this on election day when nobody would be out at the tomb or paying attention to the newspapers. They would be at bars or someplace trying to get the information. So on November the 7th, they arrive at between 9 and 10 p.m. at night to Lincoln's tomb. And again, remember, they've already seen the tomb. They've been explained to by John Carroll Power. They go to the back of the tomb. They see the bars that just had a little padlock on it. And they didn't really have the appropriate tools. So they had to saw through the, saw through the file and lock. It took them 30 minutes to do that. Believe it or not, after doing one of my lectures at the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library Museum, a guy came up to me and said, "Would you like to see the tools that were actually used that night?" I'm like, "Are you kidding?" And so he took me back to some back area where they store things like this. And these are the actual tools that were used. You see a lantern, you can see an axe, you can see some blades. The white piece you see over there is a part of the sarcophagus that they took apart. So again, it's these are the various things they used when they were trying to get into the sarcophagus. So they get inside. They lift the lid of the sarcophagus, which was really not put on there very solidly, so they could easily get that off. However, the coffin was in there so tight, they couldn't get any leverage to get it out. So they're trying to figure out a way to get the coffin out, which was a lead-lined coffin. So they're probably 500 pounds or so. And so what they decided to do is they cut the foot side, which said Lincoln, off the end, and they were going to slide it out. Okay, but again, they had I'll explain this in a second. They had 2 people working on this. They had another person who was a lookout, and they had another person who was going to drive the wagon who was waiting somewhere else. So I'm not, it'd be tough to get all that done with 2 people. So Mullen had assigned Swaggers to be the lookout and to signal to Billy Brown, the driver of the horse and the wagon. So again, they had this all set up. And so 2 of them were working on the sarcophagus. One's out watching, the other's waiting with the wagon somewhere. So at some point, when they saw how difficult it was going to be to get this coffin out, Mullen changed his mind and said, "Swaggles, you come hold the lantern while we do our work." So one of the things that happened is one of the grave robbers actually took that axe and they were going to just bash the sarcophagus. And the other guy said, "No, don't do that, because if we can put it back together, it may be a while before they even realize that he's gone." So that's why they only cut out one side. And you can see they got about 15 to 18 inches. They got the coffin slid out a little bit. Then Swaggles was sent to go get Brown so they could load the coffin onto the wagon and drive it to Indiana. So Mullen and Hughes had worked pretty hard, so they went to an oak tree, we believe to smoke. It was about 100 feet away. And they're just taking a break while they're waiting on the carriage to arrive. Now here's where it gets really interesting. This is Robert Todd Lincoln at the bottom of the page. There was another secret plot. Swagles was actually a paid informant for the Secret Service. Also, Billy Brown was a paid informant for the Secret Service. So they had 4 people, and 2 people had infiltrated what this group was trying to do. And they had no idea. Okay? So what happened was when Swagles met with the criminals at the bar, he went to Terrell, who's the Secret Service guy, and said, look, these people are planning to steal the body of Abraham Lincoln. And again, it's hard for them to actually believe that somebody was actually going to do that. So they contacted Robert Todd Lincoln and said, they're going after your dad's body. What do you want us to do? And he said, well, we should protect it. And he said, well, we need to catch them in the act. He says, do you mind if we let them sort of get the coffin out a little bit or something to that effect? And so basically, they got the okay from Robert Todd Lincoln. So let's go back to November 6th. So I mentioned them riding the train down. So on the evening of November 6th, when the criminals, Hughes, Mullen, Swagles, and Brown, boarded Chicago overnight to Springfield, they got on the first car, making sure nobody had seen them. Well, what was happening was the detectives was watching them, and they got on the same train. So they all rode down on the train together. Okay? There's a lot of funny aspects to this story. So this is basically what it looked like back then when they got there for the sarcophagus. You can see all they had was that padlock to get through to try to get into the body. So again, as I said, Swagles and Hughes met with J.C. Power to get a tour of the tomb. Now what you need to know is that Power knew who these guys were. So here, imagine you're the custodian of the Lincoln tomb. You love Abraham Lincoln, and you're telling guys who you know are going to try to steal his body basically what they need to know to get their job done. So I can imagine how difficult that was for him. Am I going the wrong way again? No, here we go. All right. So this, if you may remember, this is the front of the tomb where you would enter if you go to the Lincoln tomb today. So what happened is Power and agents, and I believe there was a reporter there too, actually went into the front area, took their shoes off, and sat there for approximately about 3 hours, waiting for the criminals to show up. Because they didn't know what time they were going to be there. So they arrived between 9 and 10 p.m., as I said earlier. Agents have been waiting. And so imagine you're the agents wanting to catch these criminals, and they hear them filing and hammering on the lock, trying to get the lock off. So the secret code was this. Swagles, and this was the one who was supposed to be the lookout, had to hold the lantern for a while. So when they told him to hold the lantern, he got a little bit, oh no, what am I going to do? I've got to go warn the detectives that they're about to get the coffin out. So finally they told Swagles to go get Billy Brown. So Swagles goes to the front of the tomb and just says the word wash to them, which was the cue to go get the criminals. Now, this is the side of the tomb. You're not going to, this next video I'm going to show you if it works. Do we have Wi-Fi here?
Yes.
I don't know if it'll pick it up or not. We'll see. Okay. All it was me running around the side of the tomb. And the only reason I was going to show you that, besides my running technique, was just to show you how long the tomb is. I mean, it's a good distance. The tomb is really big. So once they got the signal, the agents started running around the side of the tomb, both sides of the tomb. By the way, this just popped in my head. When I was working at the tomb many years ago, vandals came by and spray painted the whole side of the Lincoln tomb. And it had to be sandblasted off. It cost thousands of dollars. So anyway, an agent, George Haycox's revolver were running. His gun goes off. Now remember, we're like late at night in a cemetery, and the gun goes off. It sounds like a cannon. Okay? So the two criminals who had been inside and they were outside now smoking a cigarette, hear this, they'd say, oh, something's up, so they take off. Okay? Remember, Swagles was with the agents, he was in on the plot. And Billy Brown, by the way, wasn't even there. He got off the train midway on the trip down. And when they kept asking, where's Billy? He'd just say, oh, he's asleep. I'll go get him when the time's ready, you know. And then when they got closer, they said, why doesn't he get off the train? They said, oh, he got off the town early because he has to go get the wagon. So they had an excuse for him, and he didn't even make the trip. So, you may have noticed on the tomb there were, we showed the door you're going into, but there's an upstairs area above the tomb. Now, they used to allow people to walk around up there, but it caused the tomb to leak. And so it was leaking right in that Golden Dome area where Lincoln's headstone is. So I think it's been at least 20 years, maybe longer, that they've not allowed anybody up there. There were some people up there, but most visitors can't visit up there anymore. But at that time, the agents were looking for the criminals. They didn't know the criminals were taken off. So they thought they saw something up there. And the agents start firing their guns. And all of a sudden, one of them says, hey, Tyrrell, is that you? They were shooting at each other. They saw bodies up there and didn't realize that it was their own gang. And so they get down from the tomb, the top of the tomb. And again, I've already told you that Mullen Hughes had left the cemetery. Swagles and Brown, Mullen Hughes assumed that Swagles and Brown were caught because they weren't with them. And again, Swagles and Brown was in on the plot to try to keep them from stealing the body. So they walk inside and they see Lincoln's coffin pulled 15 to 18 inches out of the sarcophagus. And this drawing's really hard to see, but this was a sketch actually done of what they saw at the time. There's no photograph of it. I'll try to make it a little clearer. This is the end that they cut off. This is the coffin sticking out a little bit. And what you see, the label A over there, is actually the top of the sarcophagus that they had. So, I mean, they got a lot of it tortured and taken off, but they only got it out 15 to 18 inches. So, did they catch him? Yes. 10 days later. And where did these brilliant criminals go? Right back to the bar where they plotted to do this theft. Okay? So I told you they weren't very smart. So again, they were arrested. Basically, the agents walked in, and one was asleep in the bar, and the other was drinking at the bar. And they went up to the guy that was asleep and said, "Wake up! We got you," and basically arrested him. So again, the trial took place next year the next year in Springfield. They got 1 year in prison. That was it, because at that time, there really wasn't a steadfast law about what you do with people who are trying to rob a grave. So they really got off light. And the law changed after this, by the way. But you know, they got charged with conspiracy to commit a crime and theft and damage of property. So what would happen when people would steal bodies, if they got in trouble, it's because they would take the jewelry off the bodies and keep it for themselves when they sell it to the medical school and stuff. And so, again, at the time, the grave robbing wasn't that big a deal. So laws were definitely strengthened so that people who did something like this got 10 years. It could get up to 10 years, I should say. So you think that's the end of the story? No, there's more to go. So, imagine you're John Carroll Power. You're the custodian of the tomb. You've got Lincoln's sarcophagus not destroyed, but taken apart. You got the coffin hanging out, and it's heavy. You can't do it by yourself. But you got people coming the very next day to visit Lincoln's tomb. What are you going to do? So he thinks pretty quickly and said, you know what, I'm going to call the people as part of the National Monument Association. So they went and got Lincoln's sarcophagus coffin, and they buried it inside the tomb underneath some boards and planks. Now, what I haven't told you yet, which you're going to think, and it was there for 2 years, because they had to redo the tomb. The tomb was built on it was starting to lean, and so they had to rebuild the tomb, and that caused quite a few problems. We believe Lincoln's body. This number goes up every year. when I first started working the tomb, it got moved 10 times, and it went to 14. I read something just last week, said now it's 18 times. So I think, it goes up every year. But they did have to move the body several times because they were hiding it here. And so what Carol Power was trying to do is, he didn't want to lie. So they put the sarcophagus back together. So when people would come by and say, is Lincoln's body in there? He goes, oh yes, Lincoln is in the tomb. But he wouldn't say Lincoln's in the sarcophagus because Lincoln was in there. Now, if you watch the DVD, which was put out by, I think, A&E on the History Channel, they make a mistake in the DVD. They say Lincoln was buried in the basement. There is no basement to the tomb. Okay? There's just an inside area. So again, Lincoln's body was moved many times because they ended up having to rebuild the tomb, and so they would bury him outside and again move him around. Well, and the whole family too. Now, I've been out to the Oak Ridge Cemetery numerous times. What is the thing that you can stand on and ride around? Segway, yeah. So I had a Segway one time, which I thought was pretty cool. Wasn't mine. And I rode around the cemetery to see all the different headstones that are out there. It's a pretty interesting thing to do. But this was John Carroll Power's headstone at Oak Ridge Cemetery. He's got a whole paragraph on there, and basically what it says is, he was on duty the night of November 7th when ghouls attempted to steal the body of President Lincoln. And that put on his headstone. So again, he was very upset about that. And again, he wrote a book about that. So this is a photo of another tomb custodian later on, Hubert Wells Fay, and had the original sarcophagus outside. And from my understanding is they don't really know what happened to this sarcophagus. They have a piece of it when you go into the tomb, enter the front door. There's a small piece, which I believe I have a photograph I'll show you in just a moment. But we believe it got destroyed. That's the piece that they have there. You can see that was on the sarcophagus with malice toward none, with charity for all. And again, it's in a glass case as you walk inside the tomb. I don't know if we're going to be able to get the video to work, but I won't even try it. This is you can find this video online. It's just a minute, 30 seconds, but it shows the tomb in various stages of construction and reconstruction because they had to build it, put it back together. And by the way, if you go to the tomb, you can walk around the yard, around the back of the tomb, and they have little placards in places in the yard saying this is where the family was buried and stuff. So again, it's sort of interesting to do. Before I show you the books and stuff, when you remember when Elvis, Michael Jackson, and all those died, people said that they didn't really die. They were, hiding away. They claimed to see Elvis and Hardy's or something like that. Yeah, hiding away. JFK, same thing.
Al Capone.
Yeah, all of them. They believe that you're not dead. Well, same thing happened with Abraham Lincoln. And so many times when they moved Lincoln's body around, they would open the casket to look to see if Abraham Lincoln was still in there. And finally, Robert Todd Lincoln said, quit doing that. He's dead, that's him. Okay? But the last time they buried Lincoln below in the steel cage and 10 feet of cement, they actually looked at it one more time. And there's a story that's in Life magazine. I forgot what year. I've got a copy of the story. Where a grandfather called his grandson at school, said, get on your bike, leave school, and come out to the cemetery. You're going to see something nobody else is ever going to see again. So his son went out there on a bicycle and actually got to see the face of Abraham Lincoln. And they said his face, looked like a bronze statue, and that he had gloves on his hand, and most of the gloves were gone. There were some white threads there, and there were remnants of an American flag that had been on his lapel. But they said it was you could tell that it was Abraham Lincoln. But again, if you're interested in more details of this story, I've only given you some of the highlights. There's so much more I can tell you. Stealing Lincoln's Body, I think, is probably one of the best books. And the gentleman, the DVD, Stealing Lincoln's Body by the History Channel, was the one I mentioned earlier. The person who wrote this book appears in this DVD and gives a lot of good information about this. The book on the left there, Lincoln's Grave Robbers, that's the children's book. So if you have a young child you want to read about robbing a grave, you can get this book. Well, I will tell you this. I've read all these books, and I will tell you that every book has something in it a little different about this story that some of the other ones do not have. So it makes it really interesting. You find a little bit of tidbits. There's not really many discrepancies that I remember. Besides John Carroll Power's book, The Great Abraham Lincoln Hijack, that was really the first book after John Carroll Power somebody besides him wrote about the Lincoln story. But again, all of these are things I would highly recommend if you're interested. The DVD is about an hour and a half long, and they start out talking about the assassination and Mary and how she dealt with losing 3 sons and her husband and so forth. Then it gets into the actual what happened with the grave robber. Now, the only reason I show this photo is I think it's cool. Okay. I've got my Lincoln sport coat on, and I'm standing in front of the tomb. And I still go when I go in July. I'll visit the tomb, the home. I'll work at the museum. I go to almost all these sites every time I go because it's really a neat thing to do that. What I'm standing beside there is if you go to the Lincoln Museum, they have life-size statues of Abraham Lincoln. And so not allowed to touch. One of my favorite things to do at the museum is to take photos of families standing with the Lincoln family. Interestingly, you can't see in this photo, that the photo on the right is a colorized photo of Lincoln. But interestingly, when the museum first opened up, they had a statue of John Wilkes Booth in the background. And I see somebody going, why would you do that? Well, if you see where I'm standing there, if you looked behind me, John Wilkes Booth was leaning up against a rail of the fake White House that's in there. So, I mean, they were in the same spot. And one of the presidents came in and said, I don't think we want John Wilkes Booth in the museum. So they actually took down the statue, and it hasn't been seen in probably 15 years or so. Another interesting thing happened. One of my favorite relics was they used to have Abraham Lincoln's top hat back there. And so they paid, I think it was like $10 million to get a lot of artifacts, not just for the hat, but a lot of Lincoln artifacts. Then later they discovered that that hat probably was not Abraham Lincoln's hat. And so, ironically, that president lost her job because of that purchase. But it was interesting because the hat had fingerprints where, you would say Lincoln would tip his hat. Another thing I want to point out about Abraham Lincoln, we know how brutal the media is today of politicians, all the presidents, whether you're Democrat or Republican, you get slammed in the media. Lincoln got it 10 times worse. They sell a book at the museum that shows all the things they used to say. They used to draw pictures of Lincoln as a monkey. Can you imagine doing that today for a president? But they did said all kinds of nasty things about him. They talked about he was a doofus and all this kind of stuff. And so they really hammered Abraham Lincoln pretty hard. And one of my favorite quotes from him was somebody accused him of being two-faced. And you know what his response to that was? If I had 2 faces, do you think I would use this one? So again, that was another thing I liked about Lincoln. He had a sense of humor. All right, I'll stop here now and appreciate your attention. I want to see if you have any questions about anything related to this presentation or maybe something else. If I don't know the answer, I can make up something. Yes?
Didn't he have a mole? Didn't he have a mole?
I don't know. If he did, he covered it up with his beard. He asked if he had a mole. If he did, he covered it up with his beard. You know the story about why he grew a beard, right?
A little girl.
There you go. The little girl wrote him a letter and said, I think you'd look better with a beard. And so he grew the beard and eventually met the young girl later and wrote him the letter. And so I think he made a wise decision there. Other questions?
I might have missed this, but what was the whole reason behind stealing the body?
They wanted to get their major engraver out of
Just
jail.
to get the 200,000?
Well, the 200,000 was, they're just like, well, we're going to get him out of jail. Let's just get some money too. So they wanted to get $200,000, but they really wanted to get their friend out of jail because he's the one that did all the artwork. Yes, sir.
Was Mary Todd still committed to the asylum when this happened, or was she out? Did she know this happened?
This is later, and there's controversy about that.
Yeah.
Some people believe that, she was put in an asylum.
Right.
And some people believe that her son did it, Robert Todd did it because he felt that she was selling all these Lincoln artifacts because she got in financial trouble.
Yeah.
By the way, so you know, I think he said, no, that wasn't it. She was really, you know, something was wrong. But my God, 3 of your children died, you know,
Yeah.
besides your husband, he's shot. Yeah, she didn't attend the funeral. We don't know whether she went to saw the body. The belief is that she did not. They think she may have gone out to Springfield one time to see where they had buried him, but we're not really sure of that. She just couldn't take it, and then some people believe she never recovered. But she did a lot of things that people don't talk about. She visited the Army, people who had been hurt in the Army and had a lot of injuries, and spent a lot of time talking to those people. She did a lot of things that people forget about her. People like to talk about her like she was crazy. I mean, again, now she did bring in people to run seances,
Yeah.
and she would claim that, you know, she's talking to the kids, and Lincoln was talking to her and stuff like that. But
One of them warned him he was gonna die, so where I wrote my undergrad thesis on her, where she did the seances at the White House, he banned them. And one came back and said, I heard this guy talking in a bar, and like, he said he's going to assassinate you, and he was like, we told you you're not allowed at the White House, like, send him on his way.
yeah, well, yeah, Lincoln had one bodyguard, and his belief was if somebody wants to kill me, they're going to. There's nothing I can do about it. So again, that's not the approach we take today. Yes, sir.
Well, during that time, a lot of prominent people with lots of money had seances regularly.
Yeah, it was not an unusual thing, and I'm sure they're still occurring today, but back then, you know, Lincoln, what I've read about Lincoln is he really wasn't into it, tried not to attend those, but I think Mary probably forced him to attend 1 or 2 at least. Yes.
Was it true that Mary Lincoln was not very well liked?
Well, depends on who you're talking about, but there were a lot of people in the White House supposedly didn't like her because she would say things to them about them being jealous of her husband being the president. And she tried to be protective, and she spent a lot of money on the White House when they really didn't have it. Some people weren't very happy with that.
Well, I heard somewhere that Ulysses S. Grant and his wife was supposed to go with them to Ford's Theater that night, but they said the real reason was because they were going to see their children. But I heard that another reason was because his wife did not like Mary Todd Lincoln very much.
And that may or may not be true. I've heard the same thing. It's just a matter of if you want to believe what Ulysses S. Grant said, and he probably didn't want to upset Lincoln or Mary. But again, it's you know, she upset some people for sure, but we all do, don't we? Other questions, comments? Yes, sir.
I was curious what $200,000 is worth today is over $6 million.
No, I meant to look that up today, so thank you for doing it. Did you hear that?
Yes.
200,000 worth $6 million today. So they were asking for a lot of money back then. So, but you know, think about it. At that time, I believe Lincoln was the first president to be assassinated in office. And to think that somebody would steal the body, when the plot came out, people heard about this, most people just didn't believe it. Oh, nobody's going to do that. So that's why they really didn't have any kind of protection set up. But afterwards, once the attempted theft occurred, they did have some people from the National Lincoln Monument Association stand by the grave and watch over them. So again, by the way, I didn't mention this, but while they were redoing the tomb, the workers who were working on the inside of the tomb were walking on top of Lincoln and the family. They were buried underneath the dirt, and they didn't know it. So, you know, some people thought, oh gosh, how could you do that to President Lincoln? But again, they were so fearful that somebody else may try it, that they didn't want anybody to know. So the workers were actually, and there were piles of wood and all kinds of junk and some trash in there. So again, it was, that's where they tried to protect it. Yes?
Was that the only attempt to steal his body?
It's the only one that we know of that occurred. There were at least 2 others planned. The one that I meant, there was another one planned where they got that, and the guy got drunk and told the prostitute, and the prostitute told the chief of police. But there was another plot that they heard of as well, and I can't remember at the moment why they decided not to go through with it. So it wasn't, we don't believe that the group that actually tried it, that was the original idea. We believe they heard it from somebody else.
It'd probably be impossible to steal his body today.
Yeah, it would, First of all, I'll tell you, as far as I know, hopefully they would have electronic equipment out there now. But I'm not sure that they do. How are you gonna get through 10 feet of cement in a steel cage? And, so it'd be really tough to do. So no one's tried it that I know of since then. Yes?
If I understand their story correctly, the reason that they did not succeed in stealing the body was because Hayes' gun went off?
Well, when we ran around to the side, they were already outside and smoking or just taking a break, and they took off after that. They knew something happened.
Because of the gun going on?
Yeah, they took off because they heard the gun, because they were gonna go back in and work some more. And they just assumed their other two cohorts who were actually working with the Secret Service had gotten caught. They didn't know that they were working with the Secret Service office. Other questions? Yes, sir.
We have been to,
Grants?
Mayor Todd's childhood home in Lexington, Kentucky.
Oh, good.
We got there at 4:30 and it was closed, but we walked right out. So we've been,
Yes, it's there's a lot of Lincoln sites, Mary Lincoln, Robert. Again, I highly recommend reading a book about Robert Todd Lincoln. He led a very interesting life. I believe he died 10 days shy of his 83rd birthday, and was very wealthy. He was asked to run for president a couple times, and he said no. I mean, his father was assassinated. He saw the president shot, and he avoided really getting into that. But he did. He was a very smart businessman. Other questions or comments? Okay, I've made some cookies and desserts over there if you'd like to help yourself. I appreciate your time and attention. I'll hang around for a little bit if you want to come up and talk about it. And I know some of you want to get your photo taken with the sport coat. I'll do that. Help yourself. I worked hard on those cookies.